Think about your favorite pixel art game. For nearly 2 decades, Pokemon was defined by 2D art. Every town, every route, every single monster was a collection of carefully placed squares on a tiny screen. By 2010, the writing was on the wall. The gaming industry was moving on. Full 3D graphics were becoming the standard, and the Nintendo DS was entering its final years. Welcome back to Secret Levels. Today we are traveling to the Unova region to look at Pokémon White. Faced with the inevitable jump from 2D to 3D, Game Freak didn't just phone it in. Instead, they decided to give 2D pixel art one final flawless, incredibly bold victory lap. They gave us a game that felt mature, deeply narrative-driven, and completely fresh. This wasn't just another sequel. It was the ultimate masterpiece that closed the curtains on a golden era. When you booted up Pokémon White for the first time, you remember the very first battle that probably made your jaw drop. For 4 generations, Pokemon sprites were mostly static images. They might do a little hop or a brief wiggle. When they entered the field, when they stood there, Gen 5 changed everything. Suddenly the pixel art was alive. Every single one of 156 new Pokemon was fully and constantly animated, and they didn't stop moving. They breathed, they swayed, they reacted to the status conditions, and the camera would actually zoom in and out, dynamically following each action. Pushed toward this new hardware that the DS had an absolute limit. Game Freak took a traditional and static art style and made it feel as fluid and cinematic as a modern cartoon. It was beautiful, vibrant, and pure to the love letter in medium pixels. But the visuals weren't the only thing that made Gen 5 a masterpiece. It was the absolute boldest creative risk that the franchise ever took in history. Do you remember stepping into tall grass for the first time? You couldn't catch a Pikachu. You couldn't find a Zubat. In fact, until you beat the Elite Four and watched the credits, every single Pokemon classic from the last 14 years was completely locked out. Forced all of us to become brand new trainers again. You couldn't rely on your old favorites. You had to explore, experiment, and fall in love with a new roster of Pokemon. It brought that exact magical feeling back. You can't just talk about Gen 5 without talking about the story. Pokemon games are usually straightforward. Straightforward journeys, talking about collecting badges, talking about stopping a goofy villain group. Pokemon White gave us a narrative that felt like a genuinely mature environment. It introduced N, a tragic, deeply empathetic antagonist who raised the question the series never dared to ask: is it actually right to keep Pokemon in Pokeballs? The conflict between truth and ideals elevated the entire experience. It wasn't just about winning a trophy, it was a philosophical clash of perspectives. When N's castle literally rises from the ground, it attaches itself to the Pokemon League. It remains one of the most jaw-dropping, epic moments in the entire franchise history. It proved that Pokemon could be genuinely gripping. Immediately after this generation, Pokemon made the jump to full 3D on the 3DS. While those games brought incredible innovations, there is something deeply magical about this specific moment in time. Pokemon White stands as an absolute peak classic of Pokemon. It represents an era where pixel art wasn't a limitation or retro. It was highly refined, masterfully executed, and it was a form of art. Remember, it was a beautiful, confident goodbye to the 2D era, and that is why, after all these years, stepping back into New Unova region feels like visiting a masterpiece that will never lose its luster. Thank you for hanging out with Secret Levels. We'll see you next time.